The town of Barrow's End was quiet, tucked away between a maze of fog-swept hills. But once a year, on the night of October 23rd, its silence was broken by the hollow sounds of shifting earth. This was the night the dead returned. The locals called it the Night of Returning. Not a holiday, but a vigil. Most avoided the old graveyard at the heart of town, though it was a place many had family buried. Few spoke openly about what happened there. The town had learned to live with it, as one learns to live with a shadow that always lingers just out of sight. Charlotte wasn't from Barrow's End. She'd moved in a few months ago, seeking quiet after a long, tiring battle with grief. Her husband, Sam, had passed unexpectedly, leaving her with a shattered heart and too many empty hours. The town seemed perfect at first, a place to hide from the world. She had noticed the stares from the townspeople, their unspoken warnings about the cemetery, but she paid little attention. Rumours, she thought. Small-town superstitions. That was until Charlotte received the note. It arrived on her doorstep, unsigned, but the message was clear. Do not go near Barrow's graveyard on October 23rd. If you value your life. She'd heard whispers about the graveyard, fragments of conversations when she passed by the townspeople. But she brushed it off, burying herself in her own sorrow. She had nothing left to fear, not even death. And so, on the night of October 23rd, Charlotte found herself walking the winding path to the graveyard. The mist rolled in thicker than usual, wrapping itself around the tombstones like a shroud. The cold seeped into her bones, each breath sharp with the bite of autumn. The graveyard gates creaked open, revealing rows of crumbling headstones and ancient crypts, bathed in the faint glow of the moon. It should have been peaceful, a place of rest for the dead. Yet, there was something wrong. The air itself felt charged, almost alive. She swore she could hear faint whispers on the wind, like voices carried from another world. Charlotte's footsteps faltered as she neared the older part of the cemetery. The graves here were ancient, the names long worn away by time. The ground seemed softer here, the earth more disturbed. Her eyes caught movement. At first it was subtle, a shift in the soil, like something moving just beneath the surface. She froze, watching as the earth bulged and heaved. And then, a hand broke through the ground. Pale, thin fingers, brittle as bone, clawed at the surface, dragging up a body. Charlotte stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. Another grave stirred to life, then another. The dead were rising, not in some feverish rush, but slowly, deliberately. They pulled themselves from the dirt, their bodies decayed, but unnervingly whole. Hollow eyes, empty of life, scanned the night as if searching for something. No, someone. Her heart pounded in her chest, the reality of it impossible to deny. These were the dead, the forgotten, returning to the world of the living. But they weren't mindless zombies. No, these figures moved with purpose, their tattered clothes hanging from skeletal frames as they shuffled towards the centre of the graveyard. Charlotte turned to run, but a soft voice stopped her. She turned, heart pounding, to find a woman standing at the gate. She was old, her face lined with age, eyes clouded with memories of things long past. "You shouldn't be here," the woman said, her voice a whisper against the wind. Charlotte's mouth opened, but no words came. Fear gripped her throat. "They return for those who called them once," the woman continued, stepping closer. "For the ones who disturbed their rest. And if they see you, they will not stop, not until you've joined them." "Why?" Charlotte managed, her voice shaking. "Why do they come back?" The old woman's eyes darkened. "The dead never forget, child. They return to settle old debts, to reclaim what was taken. Those buried here, they were not laid to rest willingly. They were wronged." Suddenly, a thought struck Charlotte. This was no accident. She'd been lured here. The note, the whispers. They had wanted her to see this, to witness the unholy procession of the dead. But why? As if in answer, one of the figures turned. Its face, or what was left of it, stared directly at Charlotte. She froze, a cold realization crawling through her. The figure was familiar. even in its decayed state. The broad shoulders, the shape of its jaw, the tattered wedding band that hung loosely from its finger. It was Sam. Her heart stopped, horror washing over her in a tidal wave. This couldn't be. Sam had died months ago. He'd been buried miles away, far from this cursed place. But here he was, his lifeless eyes locked onto her. "He was buried here," the old woman murmured softly. "They bring him back, every year." Charlotte's mind reeled. Buried here? That couldn't be true. She had buried Sam herself, far from Barrow's End, in the town where they'd spent their lives together. His grave had been small, intimate, far from this cursed soil. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're wrong. He's buried nowhere near here." The woman's gaze softened, but her voice remained grim. "The dead don't care for borders, child. They return to where they belong, to the place that calls them." Charlotte swallowed, her mouth dry. "Called?" She could barely speak the word. The old woman nodded. "Barrow's End has a hold on its dead. It was once a place of darkness, where the earth was soaked with blood and violence, long before the town ever rose. Many were buried here, their lives stolen from them. The ground remembers them, and so do the souls who were wronged." "But Sam wasn't from here," Charlotte said, a growing panic rising in her chest. "He didn't belong here." The old woman's gaze darkened further. "He was once, before you ever knew him, your husband. He was born in this place. His family left long ago, but his soul remained tied to the earth. He had roots here, deeper than you could ever imagine." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She remembered how little Sam had spoken of his past, how vague he'd always been about his childhood. He had said his family moved when he was young, that he had no real memories of the town where he grew up. Could this be that place? Could Sam have been drawn back here, not by accident, but by fate? The woman's voice softened, but her words struck like a hammer. "When he died, Charlotte, he returned to where he truly belonged. Barrow's End doesn't let go of its dead, and now neither can you." The weight of it hit her all at once. Sam had been drawn back to this cursed ground, his life bound to this town in ways she never understood. And now, as the dead reached for her, Charlotte realized that she too had been marked.
The dead moved closer, the sound of dragging feet growing louder. Sam's outstretched hand reached for her, not with malice, but with the cold grip of inevitability.
There was no running, no escape. The dead had returned, and this time they would not leave without her. In the fog-filled darkness, Charlotte's scream was swallowed by the earth, joining the whispers of the forgotten.